The night my family called me the useless one, I didn't say a word. I just stood there frozen, while every insult landed like it had been rehearsed for years. And when Marcus, my brother-in-law, stepped forward and saluted me in front of all of them, they finally realized the truth. My name is Vivian Pratt, and long before that salute, the people who should have known me best were the ones who broke me the deepest. I stepped off the late-night flight from D.C., feeling the weight of a day that had stretched far too long. The airport speakers crackled overhead. The yellow lights hung low and tired, and waves of travelers moved past me in restless patterns. My body ached from hours spent in a sealed room where no one was allowed to speak freely, and yet the silence afterward felt even heavier. There were so many things I wanted to say out loud, even just to ease my own mind, but NDAs wrapped around every thought like invisible chains. Coming home meant returning with a full suitcase and an empty tongue. Still, none of it mattered. My family had never cared about the details. The closer I drove toward Colorado Springs, the clearer it became whatever I had done this week would be reduced to nothing the moment I stepped inside their house. The two-story suburban home looked exactly the same, the yard trimmed with military precision. Inside, the familiar smell of grilled meat clung to the curtains. The TV blared some sports recap, and my parents' laughter traveled down the hallway. The walls were crowded with framed uniforms and proud moments, my father in his old Army Class A, Caleb with his fire crew, Layla and Marcus in their military wedding portrait. My absence stood out more than any picture present. Every wall reminded me this was a place where I should feel safe but never fully belonged. My father barely looked up before asking the first question. "Have you thought about getting a real, stable job yet?" No curiosity about where I had been, no concern about whether I was exhausted, not even a simple welcome home. The heaviness settled in instantly. Caleb clapped my shoulder with a grin. "Still doing those online gigs, freelancer stuff?" "Sounds fun." His tone was light, but the undertone stung. The small laughter around us sliced deeper than any open criticism. I forced a smile, the kind meant to keep the peace, even when peace wasn't offered in return. I swallowed everything I couldn't say, the late-night debates, the simulations that left entire teams breathless, the pressure of knowing one miscalculation could trigger national chaos. None of it belonged here. In this house, the only achievements that counted were the ones you could hang on a wall: medals, uniforms, ranks, framed commendations. The rest, no matter how vital, lived outside their line of sight. I lived outside their line of sight. I slipped into the familiar chair at the corner of the table, the one with the loose leg that caught on the edge. It was separated just enough from the center that I had learned not to pull it closer. It had become my place through the years, a quiet reminder of where I stood. But I didn't know then that a few weeks later, in this very same house, everything they believed about me and everything I had accepted about myself would shatter in a way none of us could undo. From the time I turned 28, my world shifted into a place where silence became a requirement, not a choice. Stepping into strategic risk analysis meant walking into secured rooms where doors locked from the inside, handing over my phone, and learning how to talk around things instead of about them. Every new assignment came with another NDA. I signed so many that after a while, I couldn't remember which secret belonged to which project. The isolation crept in slowly, like a draft under a door, until it settled into every corner of my life. Meanwhile, my family looked only at the surface. "Vivian never seems clear about anything." That was their favorite line. They'd ask about my work at holidays without waiting for an answer. Already convinced my flexible hours meant I didn't have a real career, my father kept forwarding me job listings titled, "New opportunities for you cashier positions, receptionist roles, office clerk openings." Caleb would brag about his overtime pay, then smirk that my salary probably felt like pocket change. Even extended family joined in, laughing that I was lucky because no one expected me to pay much in taxes. I learned to smile along. I wasn't allowed to correct them, and even if I could, they wouldn't have listened. They also never knew how often I saved them quietly. When my mother's insurance denied a major claim, I researched policy law, filed appeals, and got her benefits restored. She chalked it up to luck. When Caleb tangled himself in paperwork, I found him a lawyer overnight, and he told everyone his department handled it. When Layla nearly lost her scholarship over a plagiarism flag, I rewrote her paper over 3 sleepless nights, and she credited it to a kind professor. Not one of them asked how things resolved. They simply assumed it had nothing to do with me. One night, while reviewing a system report under the cold white lights of an empty office, I froze at a familiar name on the screen. Hale, Marcus Executive Officer, Naval Operations. My chest tightened. Of all the units my work touched, I had stumbled directly into the one my family idolized. I closed the file quietly, as I always did. They would never know that the systems they revered were the same ones I safeguarded in silence. During a high-pressure project analyzing vulnerabilities across naval coordination systems, I walked into the operations room to find every monitor lit up with maps and warning indicators. The room hummed with tension. We had 48 hours to identify a flaw that could jeopardize deployed units. As I scrolled through layers of system logic, a subtle gap emerged small enough to miss, but dangerous enough to be exploited. My pulse quickened when I traced it to the exact region where Marcus's unit had been stationed for months. The meeting that followed fell into a heavy silence. The entire room went still, every face sharpened with focus as I laid out the scenario and finished with the only conclusion I could reach. If this system is attacked, my voice sounded steadier than I felt. A 90-second blackout would be enough to send operations spiraling. Saying it aloud felt like setting down a live wire. We were ordered to draft a fix immediately. I worked 14 straight hours, coffee gone bitter, eyes burning, shoulders tight, but I didn't stop. Each line of code carried the thought that if I failed, the consequences might fall on someone my family believed was untouchable. When I finally uploaded the patch, the office was nearly dark except for my screen. The next morning, the system updated, risk level reduced. Impacted unit Hale, operationally safe. My breath caught, relief washing through me. Marcus would be fine. That afternoon, a uniformed officer paused beside me in the hallway. Pratt? Were you on the M7 project? His voice dropped. XO, Hale said. He was lucky. I stood still, feeling the ground shift under me. Marcus knew or suspected enough to look deeper. He was beginning to see the version of me my family never bothered to ask about. The night of Marcus's celebration felt like stepping into a world where every detail reminded me of my place. Aki! The rented hall glowed with warm lights, the smell of grilled meat mixing with expensive perfume as spouses of officers exchanged loud laughter. Tables were arranged by rank, and mine, the corner one, waited as if it had been assigned to me long before I arrived. I sat quietly, pretending not to notice the distance between where I was placed and where the family gathered. I had barely set my gift down when my mother tugged me aside, urging me not to make the evening heavy, as if my presence alone threatened the mood. I didn't argue. I just absorbed it the way I had learned to absorb everything. A relative nearby announced loud enough for half the room to hear that I lived a comfortable life, since no one expected anything from me financially. Laughter followed like it was the most harmless comment. Caleb raised a beer and added that some people worked real jobs, while others mostly did online things. His grin was playful. The sting behind it was not. I nodded. The same practiced gesture I used to keep the peace. Then came the pointed question from a woman I had never met, asking if my trip to D.C. had been some kind of extended break. My answer was brief. Because it had to be. Her laugh carried across the table, dismissive and sharp. Something inside me hollowed out at the sound. By then I knew I wouldn't last the evening. I rose quietly, slipping my bag over my shoulder, ready to leave without causing a ripple. No one looked up. No one asked where I was going. The simple truth settled in my stomach. My absence wasn't disruption, it was expected. I headed toward the exit, footsteps echoing down the long hallway. I had just reached the threshold when the doors behind me burst open. Air and sound swept through the room as everyone turned. Marcus entered in full dress whites, metals catching the light like shards of gold. The transformation in the crowd was instant. People straightened. Applause swelled. Reverence replaced chatter. I froze, hoping to blend into the shadows, but Marcus's gaze locked onto mine, and he slowed. Instead of joining Layla or my parents, he began walking straight toward me. The conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye followed him. When he was close enough, recognition passed between us, a quiet understanding born from the world behind secure doors, where gratitude wasn't spoken lightly. For a heartbeat, I felt exposed in a way that wasn't humiliating but unnervingly honest. A senior officer near my father whispered something that made him tense. The room held its breath. Marcus stopped, heels clicking together, spine straight as a line drawn with intent. "Ma'am?" His salute sliced through the silence like a bell. The room collapsed into stillness. Music shut off. A fork hit the floor. Caleb stared as if struck. My mother covered her mouth. My father watched me with a dawning confusion that bordered on fear. I answered instinctively, "Lieutenant," a reflex born from places they never imagined I'd been. He leaned in just enough. "If it weren't for you, 2 men in my team wouldn't have come home." Air left my lungs all at once. Not from shock, but because, for the first time, the truth finally stood on its own. I walked through the long stretch of the banquet hall without a single person stepping in my way. My heels tapped against the wood floor, each sound sharp in the silence that had replaced the earlier mockery. Light spilled down my back as I moved, and though I didn't dare look behind me, I felt the shift. The stares weren't dismissive anymore. They were uncertain, disoriented, as if the room itself had lost its balance. When I pushed open the door and stepped into the hallway, the cold air hit me like a clean breath after years underwater. For the first time in a long time, my chest expanded without resistance. I thought the night might finally be over. I was wrong. It was only beginning. I slowed when I reached the elevator. My pulse was still unsteady from everything that had happened inside. The soft hum of the building filled the quiet space just before Marcus appeared at the end of the hall. He walked toward me but stopped far enough not to crowd me. His voice dropped, steady and low, carrying no trace of the authority he commanded in the room moments earlier. He told me he hadn't meant to put me in a difficult position, but he couldn't stand there and let them misunderstand any longer. I answered that he didn't need to apologize. He had spoken a language they finally understood. The slight nod he gave me held the weight of 2 people who knew exactly what that salute had meant and why it could never have been done lightly. Before I could step inside the elevator, the woman who had mocked my work earlier slipped into the hallway. Her expression had none of the smug confidence she carried before. She looked at me the way people do when reality has humbled them sharply. I told her that not every kind of value can be placed on a display table. My tone wasn't cruel, but it was firm, grounded in something inside me that had finally stopped shrinking. She lowered her gaze in a wordless concession. My father appeared next, hovering in the doorway as if afraid to come closer. His hand trembled against the frame, his voice unsteady as he tried to form a question he had avoided my entire adult life. He wanted to know where I worked, why Marcus would do something like that. I told him I couldn't answer. No anger, no bitterness, just the truth. He nodded slowly, as if he understood that some doors in my life were never meant for him to open. Inside the hall, silence had turned into quiet chaos. Layla argued with Marcus, demanding explanations he refused to give. Caleb avoided everyone, unable to reconcile his old narrative with what he witnessed. My mother cried in a corner of the house for days afterward, but never dialed my number. And my father sat staring at the family photos lining the walls, finally noticing that none of them included me. They had always treated me like empty space. But when I stepped out of their orbit, that empty space deepened into something hollow and frightening. Driving from Colorado Springs back to Denver that night, the rural road stretched ahead under the sweep of my headlights. The darkness felt wide, but not lonely. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone, not even myself. I wasn't running, I was choosing. And with every mile, I stepped deeper into a version of my life that finally belonged to me. I disappeared from the family group chat the next morning. I woke in my quiet Denver apartment, sunlight slipping through the curtains. And for the first time, there was no familiar stream of messages waiting for me. I opened the chat, pressed leave group, and felt something loosen in my chest. No goodbye, no explanation. I simply stepped out of their noise. The silence that followed felt strange but light, like setting down a weight I'd carried so long it had become part of my posture. My phone buzzed almost immediately. I set it face down on the table, each vibration pulsing against the wood like a reminder of a life I'd just walked out of. Layla called 7 times in rapid succession, her panic bleeding through the missed call list. My mother left 3 voicemails, her voice trembling as she asked where I was sounding more afraid than angry. Caleb texted, "Who do you think you are, sharp and unsettled?" As if losing control of the story frightened him. My father sent only 4 words. "We need to talk." I read everything, then let the phone ring unanswered. I wasn't avoiding them. I simply refused to return to who I had been. I poured myself into work that week, moving through the Denver security office with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Our team was assigned a vulnerability in the Western transportation grid, and I worked through the data as if a fog had finally lifted. A midnight alert summoned me to a confidential briefing. 6 people, no phones. A domestic security officer nodded at me with quiet respect as I entered. Outside my family. I had never been invisible. Then came the update: Hail unit reports stable, thanks to prior fixes. A simple line, but I knew exactly who it had passed through. And as my phone kept vibrating behind me, I realized my silence had become the loudest truth I'd ever spoken. 2 weeks after the banquet, a sharp knock broke through the quiet rhythm of my office. The sound wasn't loud, but in a room filled with soft afternoon light and the low hum of digital maps, it felt intrusive. I lifted my eyes from the screen just as 3 shadows formed behind the frosted glass. My father stood tall but weighed down. My mother's hands were clasped tightly, and Layla hovered slightly behind them, her head bowed. My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to turn away, to deny them entry, yet another part wondered what silence had forced them to confront. I rose slowly, positioning myself behind my desk, my boundary, firm and intentional. For 5 long seconds, no one spoke. The air felt thick, like all of us were standing at the edge of something we couldn't name. Layla's voice cracked first. She stepped forward, tears spilling before she could form a complete sentence. I was wrong." Her words tumbled out in broken pieces, how she had laughed when others mocked me, how she had forgotten every time I'd helped her. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed, and I remained silent, letting her face what she had avoided for years. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about truth finally surfacing. My father exhaled heavily, shoulders sinking in a way I had never seen. He admitted he had taught the wrong lessons, believing worth had to be visible, tangible. He confessed he had overlooked me for years. I turned away, feeling the sting of a wound exposed too late. Some apologies hurt more than the silence that preceded them. Then my laptop lit up with a message. "If they're there, tell them I stand by what I did. Marcus." I shut the screen instantly. This was between me and my family. No witnesses, no shields. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. I'm not returning to the role I used to hold. I won't sit at the edge of the table anymore. If I'm part of this family, it has to come with respect every time, not only when convenient. The room went still again, but this silence carried a different weight. Acceptance, not denial. One by one, they nodded. No dramatic embraces, no sudden reconciliation, just the truth laid bare. And the first step of something new. I moved into a new apartment in Denver, a small place with clean lines and a wide window overlooking the city. In the late afternoon, sunlight spilled across the wooden table, casting a warm, quiet glow over a space that finally felt like mine. I hung only one picture on the wall, the front range at sunset. A view that had carried me home on countless drives. No family portraits, no framed certificates, nothing that tied me to the version of myself I had worked so hard to leave behind. This was a life built without needing to prove anything to anyone. I settled into a rhythm that felt both unfamiliar and deeply right. I began mentoring younger analysts, guiding them past the blind spots that once caught me. I attended classified conferences, stepping into windowless rooms where the value of my work was measured by impact, not visibility. The projects assigned to me grew heavier and more complex, each one a quiet vote of confidence. On Saturday mornings, I drank coffee alone by the window, savoring a stillness I once believed I didn't deserve. The heaviness that used to follow me everywhere had finally lifted. I was no longer the afterthought at a family table. I was no longer the invisible daughter. That night, an email arrived. Just one line: respect hasn't faded. No signature, no explanation. But the meaning was unmistakable. The salute had never been meant to expose me or to change my family's perception. It had been meant for me to remind me that real worth doesn't rely on applause. I closed my laptop, stepped out onto the balcony, and let the night air wash over me. Denver glowed below, wide and open, as if the city itself were an invitation. I didn't wait for my family to understand. I didn't need them to. I needed only myself whole and standing tall. And sometimes, everything begins with someone willing to walk into a room and say, "Ma'am,